For a while now, honeybee populations have been on the decline, but they're not the only pollinators in danger right now. I'm Eric Malikyte, and today on ScienceGet we're going to talk about what's killing wild bumblebee colonies in Europe, as well as give you an abridged overview of what's affecting bee populations around the world. Bumblebees are extremely important to our environment. Honeybees, wasps, and hornets all provide an essential service to us in the form of pollination. This is the process of transferring pollen grains from the male anther of a flower to the female stigma. And yes, I know what you're going to say here, but wasps and hornets are indeed pollinators and therefore need to be protected. In fact, we did a whole video on this subject a while back. Just don't go trying to swat them out of the air. You will regret it. But for the past 15 years, the disappearance of bee colonies, also known as colony collapse disorder, has been a major concern for scientists around the world. The loss of pollinators would be beyond devastating to the world's food supply, with some scientists sounding the alarm and suggesting that the very tapestry of life as we know it is under attack. Scientists have proposed a lot of theories for what might be causing this, and among these causes theorized are invasive varroa mites. Varroa mites are those tiny reddish-brown bugs you might have mistaken for a tiny red spider while doing yard work. These gross little suckers are actually parasitic organisms that sometimes live on and feed on male honeybees. But their main target, or meal of choice, is larvae and pupae that are supposed to be safely secured in beehives. This leads to the bee equivalent of birth defects and overall makes honeybees weaker and more vulnerable because the presence of these parasites can lead to the transmission of harmful viruses. Stress. Yeah, like all of us right now looking at rising gas prices and inflation, bees feel stress too, and that can be caused by humans harvesting too much honey from hives. In order for most hives to survive the winter, they need on average about 40 to 60 pounds of honey. Habitat changes. If you suddenly lost your home, you'd probably be pretty pissed off, right? Or at the very least, confused and lost. Our changing ecosystems are causing damage to existing bee populations because many of them are failing to migrate to cooler areas. In fact, many bee territories have diminished by nearly 200 miles in Europe and North America alone. In addition to this laundry list of possible causes for declining bee populations, we've also got poor nutrition, emerging diseases, and gut parasites like acute paralysis virus and nosema, respectively. There's also the idea that cell phone towers are contributing to colony collapse disorder, but that's a subject for another video. And lastly, pesticides. Thanks to some new research published in the journal Science that examined buff-tailed bumblebee colonies in Europe, we now know that glyphosate, a common weed killer, can lead to an inability for these colonies to keep warm during the winter. The buff-tailed bumblebee has a superpower, and that superpower is their ability to raise their own body temperature to contribute to the incubation of their colony's brood. But it seems that this weed killer is damaging that ability, almost like a kryptonite of some form. 15 buff-tailed bumblebee colonies were exposed to half the amount of weed killer that would typically be used in most fields. Researchers found that the exposed bees had difficulty getting the temperature of their colony above 82.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And even when they were able to do this, overall the amount of time they were able to maintain this higher temperature was 25% less than bees that had not been exposed to the pesticide. And Dr. Anja Wiedenmoller, the scientist who led the study, says that this can have detrimental effects on colony growth, that most colonies race to reach the necessary colony size to produce more queens, and the effects of glyphosate can cause those affected bees to fall far behind on this timetable. Glyphosate is only intended to kill unwanted plants, what we call weeds, and while it has been tested on individual bees, it was never tested on entire colonies. In fact, many of those tests don't account for problems that bee populations might encounter in the wild, choosing only to test on healthy, parasite-free specimens instead. And most of the colonies affected seem to be the ones that are already running low on food stores, i.e., those already vulnerable in the wild. For the last 40 years, glyphosate has been the most popular pesticide, and if the risk to buff-tailed bumblebees was not identified in tests, then it's certainly possible that there are other unforeseen side effects for other species around the world. In fact, we already know that this weed killer does cause damage to the gut biomes of honeybees, And it's been speculated that glyphosate could cause issues with the senses of bumblebees as well. The research isn't done yet, though, as it's not known how glyphosate causes damage to these bumblebees, and this could mean that every country on the planet currently using this pesticide will need to revisit how they conduct their environmental safety tests going forward. There is a positive side to this, or at least Professor James Krall from the University of Wisconsin-Madison thinks so. Interestingly enough, this study has shown us that giving vulnerable colonies access to greater supplies of food could end up negating the damage caused by this weed killer. Or at least that's how it looks right now. That could change with further research into the subject. But what do you think? Should countries and companies use more stringent tests to ensure they aren't hurting wild bees? Let me know in the comments down below. If you dug this content, be sure to do all that algorithmic jazz and like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell for notifications, and check out our new Discord, where you can interact with other members of the ScienceGet community, suggest new topics for upcoming shows, and more. And hey, check out all those wonderful names. Thank you, patrons. I'm Eric Malikyte, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.